Aliens vs Predator 2 is a sci-fi FPS, and it's also a contender for the world's goriest eat-em-up game. It was developed by Monolith Productions and published by Sierra Online in 2001. This is a sequel to 1999's Aliens vs Predator by Rebellion, which is an adaptation of the Dark Horse comic series of the same name. This game received very positive reviews at the time of its release, which earned it an expansion pack named Primal Hunt that released in 2002. Although AVP 2 has enjoyed a cult following, particularly for its multiplayer, audiences today have largely forgotten about its single-player mode. Some qualities of the game, however, are difficult to forget about. This is a generous and fun game, especially considering that it's now abandonware. For starters, AVP 2 has 3 campaigns of similar length: Human, Predator, and Alien. Each campaign features a unique player species with its own weapons, abilities, and playstyle. The Human campaign is the first one. It's the longest, and it's also the most consistent in quality. As a Marine, you have access to 10 weapons, a motion tracker, a flashlight for darker areas, a blowtorch for opening doors and containers, and a hacking device for opening doors and interacting with some other objects. The gameplay loop consists of exploring several locations, fighting enemies, and reading notes and emails. The Predator campaign is shorter, and suffers from the most technical issues and crashes out of the 3 storylines. This is a pity though, because the Predator has the most interesting style of play by far. You're equipped with a cloak for hiding yourself, a mask with several vision modes for detecting different enemies, a high jump, 8 weapons, a healing item, a hacking device, and a charge emitter, which recharges your energy pool for the cloak and several of the weapons. You'll explore some locations, you'll fight enemies, you'll read notes, you'll read emails. The loop is simpler than the Marine campaign, but combat encounters are often actually more complex to counter this. The Alien campaign, on the other hand, is the same length as the Predators, and I experienced fewer problems in playing it, but it actually features less varied content than the 2 campaigns before it. The Alien drone has 4 different attacks. It can eat dead bodies to regain health, it has an alternate view mode for dark areas, it can climb walls, attack electric panels, open vents, and your enemies will have a colored outline of pheromones to help you spot them. Sadly, the Alien cannot read emails. You'll explore several locations, fight enemies, and eat their bodies. While the first Alien level is easily the most inspired part of the game, the Alien campaign is the least complex and interesting to play with. The cumulative effect of 3 separate campaigns is interesting. They frequently overlap in terms of setting and characters, though each one makes an attempt to shed new light onto these elements every time that they're revisited. Monolith have obviously worked hard to make each playable character stand apart from the other, and there's an attempt to make each campaign build on the one before it. The Marine storyline's unique strength is atmosphere. That can be a vague term, so I'll clarify that atmosphere is the quality which a game uses to convince a player of a reality in the game's world, and that the game world is larger than what the player can see. The first Marine level features a contrast of large areas and tight corridors with low light levels, plenty of ambient sound effects, and some environmental objects that actually register on the motion tracker. Later levels won't be as well tailored as the sequence with the hidden Predator, but the Marine achieves a great sense of tension and horror, which is mostly consistent through this particular campaign. Many of the guns are also fun to use and make excellent sounds, and all of them were relevant at different times. Importantly, Human gameplay utilizes AVP2's best instance of resource management. Health, armor, and ammunition are depleted quickly, and they're not easily replaced. Pickups for these resources are always placed in interesting spots that aid the game's pacing. Making you scramble for resources is always a great way to up the tension in a survival game. Likewise, many emails and notes are in thoughtful locations and are fun to read. Less thoughtful, however, is the environmental and level design. Some entranceways are clearly indicated by light, but just as often you'll find yourself struggling to find the right white door in a corridor full of white doors. So, some environments are engaging, though many more seem to be made out of repeated assets and offer little in the way of interesting opportunities for gameplay and storytelling. The quality just isn't as consistent as you would hope from Monolith. Most egregiously, some readable notes in the first level actually mention a luck combination, but the player never gets an opportunity to input that combination anywhere in the game. Many boss fights are quickly reduced to kiting your enemy while shooting them enough times with the relevant weapon. While the weapons were fun and each one managed to be relevant, the player won't have them all for long enough to experiment with them properly before the game ends. The Marine campaign is screaming for something like a wave mode, where the player can utilize all of their tools and maybe even lock and unlock certain choke points to manage enemies. The Predator campaign suffers from many of the same issues, though it offers some more compelling gameplay. Out of the three species, the Predator is the game's best realized. The cloak, which incentivizes stealth, and the weapons, which incentivize action, allow for a high ceiling in player choice, as many situations can be tackled in multiple ways. The movement system serves as a good mid-ground between the Marines walking and the Xenomorphs wall crawling, as the Predator possesses a powerful leap which allows players to get very clever with the more vertical levels. Though the Predator has fewer weapons than the Marine, the weapons are more complex. There's a neck gun to hold enemies in place, a plasma pistol to stun enemies, a spear gun for long range. Again, the strength of the Predator is its flexible tools and its ceiling for player expression. Unfortunately, this potential is rarely fulfilled in the single-player campaign. Encounters can frequently be completely skipped using stealth, which might have led to interesting decision making if you couldn't actually regenerate your health and energy for free after every encounter. The alternate vision modes, although practical, are very ugly. The ability to collect enemy skulls as trophies is a great idea, but it just doesn't go anywhere. I ran into frequent crashes and several bugs, including a faulty kill box which allowed me to fall below the playable area of a level, forcing me to reload a previous save. It's easily the least stable campaign, but I had more fun playing the Predator than anything else just because you get more opportunities to use its tools. It's easy to imagine how gameplay could be improved by adding a payoff to collecting skulls, like maybe a new mode for the mask, or even something as simple as a cosmetic upgrade. In the same vein, perhaps we can think of ways to reward stealth or reward daring playstyles, because I think that is what's missing. Some sort of acknowledgement of how you utilize these complex weapons. The Xenomorph campaign was thankfully more stable, but it's troubled in other ways. Alien gameplay I found to be the simplest of the three, though I have to admit it's also the most charming. The first Xenomorph level sees you hatch from an egg, scuttle through vents, locate an isolated victim, impregnate him, and then bite your way out of his chest. Later, the adult Xenomorph has only a handful of choices to make in combat. You can perform a leap attack for an instant kill, but you will not be able to eat the destroyed corpse. You can sneak up on an enemy to attempt a head bite and gain a lot of health, but risk getting caught. Or you can claw wildly at everything in your way and then eat up the mess afterwards, which is actually the least fun and most optimal way to play the campaign. Lastly, the alien can listen in on conversations from the shadows. This led to less storytelling than the other campaigns, where you can also read notes and emails, but it led to some more engaging implementation of what was there. Monolith's care in translating their source material to interesting gameplay is highly compelling, but it doesn't save the Xenomorph storyline. The trend of resource management getting less interesting throughout the campaigns continues. The alien has no weapons or armor or cloak, and so there is no resource to spend other than your health. And you can only spend that by throwing yourself into combat, after which it is easily replenished by the overabundance of unarmed humans to be found throughout the campaign. While this makes diegetic sense, it doesn't make for varied or interesting gameplay. Environmental design is at its worst here too, with too many levels relying on dark corridors and vents. I find it very telling that the chest-bursting sequence leaves such an impact on players. If the campaign had involved more moments like this that let you play with Xenomorph biology, it would undoubtedly leave a better taste in the mouth. The shared strength of these campaigns is their capacity for mood and atmosphere, as well as unique gameplay in search of some sort of diegesis. Each species quite naturally seems to emulate a separate genre by its own virtue. The Marine plays like a horror game, the Predator like a stealth or action game, and the Alien like, well... This clarity of identity is a joy to experience and feels very strong. While some abilities are recycled between species, for instance, all characters need to have a way to interact with doors and electric panels, There is a large effort to differentiate each species and to present their unique elements diegetically. For instance, the Marine's health is communicated through a heart rate monitor. The Predator's alternate vision modes are built into its mask, and they can't be used when its mask is absent. And the Xenomorph's heads-up display is incredibly minimal because it doesn't have any equipment. This adherence to a consistent game world and the effort to differentiate each species' play experience is largely successful. At the same time, there are many shared problems between the species. All three have poor hitboxes at close range, level design can leave you lost no matter which species you're playing as, and none of the three protagonists are very interesting. There are a couple of other things I'll touch on before I address the game's story. On the subject of high standards, the art direction is very strong despite some technical limitations. While the geometry of each level is quite brutal, a lot of intricate textures and cleverly placed static lighting helps to rein in what would otherwise be a very ugly game. Levels feature a lot of blacks, dark reds, and muted blues, which are taken right from the comics. Some areas fall flat, but the character and weapon design are both very faithful to the comics and films, and all important elements of characters are easily distinguishable. Each enemy and weapon type is visually unique and can be identified quickly. Likewise, the sounds are fantastic. The human whimpering in particular is incredibly evocative. No. Some sounds might not be original, but AVP2 has a distinct soundscape which will stick with you. Thankfully, I can say the same for the story. Overall, the game does little to engage the player overtly, but it still managed to win me over with some great character writing. The game's saving grace is its ability to revisit the same characters and settings from three different perspectives, and create stories that transcend their limitations. For example, even though Dr. Eisenberg doesn't become a main character until the late game, some accounts of his actions, his behavior, and his backstory that can be read as early as the very first Marine level. Another example, though they never take center stage, there are two background characters at the pods who are a young engaged couple working as mercenaries. And each time these characters are revisited, the player sees them in a new light, perhaps by how one talks about the other in private or how they treat the people around them. It's this exercise in structure that allows AVP2 to achieve depth. The game can establish some emotional sincerity, then revisit that sincerity later and show a meaningful change. General Rykov and Dr. Eisenberg were standouts. The rest is sort of superfluous. Monolith were ultimately generous in their writing at this game, and in other ways too. AVP2 has an abundance of fun cheat codes that I have wasted a lot of time on. I know this is an aspect of games that people don't often talk about, but I do think it adds a lot of replayability to a game, and it works to help you engage with it. On that matter, there's a large number of mods for this game too. There are some quality of life fixes like widescreen support. There's improved textures, there's new campaigns, and there's some aesthetic changes. Mod support is always an advantage for a game. It feeds a community, it gives the game more shelf life. Aliens vs Predator 2 is rough around the edges, but the effort and care are tangible. The gameplay is varied and faithful to its sources, and the story is a pleasant surprise. Many of the problems that I've mentioned with resource management were actually fixed when Rebellion made their spiritual successor to this game, and Monolith nowadays seem to specialize in sandbox-type action games. AVP2 is abandonware and very easy to run on any system nowadays. This game is definitely worth playing for fans of the franchise, people with an interest in this era of shooters, or anyone else looking for a janky little game to play for free. So if you've played this game and enjoyed it, or if you think I've gotten anything wrong, feel free to let me know what you think. Thank you for watching.